Welcome to CBIA webinar on workplace dysfunction, dealing with dysfunctional workplace behavior. We're pleased to have with us as a presenter Kenya Rutland. He is the Chief Enthusiasm Officer for KJR Consulting, a learning and organizational development firm. Kenya has over 15 years of training and development experience working in such areas as change management, customer service, diversity, leadership, and team development. He has been privileged to work with various clients including Morgan Stanley, UNICEF, Fidelity, and AmeriCorps. Please join me in welcoming Kenya. However, if I could also add that all questions, Kenya will work them in if he can. If not, he will wait till the end of the webinar to present. Kenya?
All right. Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much. And good morning to you all. I want to start by just saying on behalf of CBIA and KJR Consulting, my firm, we'd like to say thank you for taking the opportunity to join us to talk about workplace dysfunctions and specifically how we can deal with dysfunctional workplace behavior. As Philip said, one of my goals is always to ensure that the sessions, especially webinars, are done in a way that you feel firmly that it's been worth your time. And so I know very often there are questions, and I'll try to make this as interactive as possible, and at the same time, as he said, weave those in so that we can get those answered for you, or towards the end, save some time. So to get started, what I wanted to do was to ask you if you could, you all should have gotten the learning guide that actually was utilized, and that's what's on the screen now. That learning guide is what we use for the session. And the first 2 pages of the learning guide really kind of set the stage for something that we'd like to begin with. But, as we think about our program and if we think about workplace dysfunction, there's a lot of different things that come to mind for us. And so what I wanted to do is just kind of give you a quick overview of kind of what we'll talk about. And then I'm going to back up to those 2 pages that I was just referencing to just kind of start the discussion around what are we talking about when we discuss workplace dysfunction. So the starting thing we'll do is we'll define some work dysfunctional behavior. We'll then talk about the impact this behavior has in the workplace. How does it leave you feeling in your HR capacity that many of you have? And then on the other side of that, how might it impact the productivity of your organization? So really setting you and I up for what we need to do. We're then going to introduce 3 very specific behaviors that we need to watch out for, and those are known as our 3 amigos of dysfunctional behavior. And the focus of those is really utilizing the Hershey Matrix, skill versus will matrix. We'll kind of take those behaviors through that matrix and just kind of define how and what you and I can do to work through those. And then the last one that we'll cover as a goal are going to be 4 C's that we need to make sure we have in line and in order when we're trying to deal with this behavior. And then we'll close out with 3 rules that I have that I think are really powerful for those of us who are dealing with these behaviors to keep in mind, because sometimes we try to wear our capes and become the Superman or Superwoman, when in actuality there are certain things that we might be able to do to just kind of, address the problem right away. So towards that end, as you see with the graphic that was on the cover page of the handout you got, we have an employee putting his fingers in his ears, and sometimes while that may seem to be comical, that's exactly what happens. Somebody's using or displaying dysfunctional behavior, you and I are putting our heart and soul and trying to resolve it, and voila, they're making a joke out of it. The adage is that we very often spend 80% of our time taking care of the 20% of our employees who are quote-unquote problem employees or have problem behaviors, and our goal is to ensure that you don't have to do a lot of that anymore. So when we talk about workplace dysfunction, if you could, take a look at page 2 and 3 of the learning guide. And I'm going to start with page 2. To make this a little bit interactive, what I'd like to have you do on page 2, which is what I have on the screen right now, the question is, what workplace behavior or what workplace dysfunction on this list might you be able to identify with? And what we've defined this as is workplace dysfunction looks like. And so if you take a look at this list really quick, I'll have you scroll through it. And as you do, I'm going to read out a few that I've had regularly mentioned. But if you could, just make a mark next to the ones that you can identify with on page 2. And some that quickly come to mind are things like, nothing can get done without the boss's approval. Cubicle mates IM or email each other back and forth as opposed to talking to each other. There are more attorneys than employees or staff. Reward system. What reward system would be something that your staff probably would say to us if we were asking them about your reward system? You have IT rules that are so strict that you really can't set or know your login information. Another comical one is the boss, the supervisors, or the organization has a wall of shame. We really like bringing up and telling people what they've done wrong, but we never really do anything to try to catch people doing good. The accounting department is so buried that, they have accumulated all of this vacation because they never get a chance to utilize it. And I might even say any department in your organization. The only way for somebody to get promoted is through death or somebody leaving the company that's in a senior role. And then last but not least, no one gets fired no matter how ineffective they are in doing their job. There's a lot of things that are on the list. There's some that you might identify with. There's some that might stand out even more. In a traditional forum, I might have you kind of have a discussion around those. But my thought for you with this initial conversation or this initial slide is think about workplace dysfunction. Think about what's on this list. Think about your workplace. And the question is, do any of these exist? And if so, really and truthfully, think about how they impact your ability to get your job done. How does it impact your staff's ability to get their job done? I say that the first list that I showed you is a little bit more comical, but something that we might deal with a little bit more is what's on page 3. And if you go to the slide again, the handout packet again, and this time around you go to page 3, which I have up on the screen, workplace dysfunction also looks like this. And here's a few things that come to mind again. Sometimes you do have people who declare war on their department. I can't wait to stop working for this person, and when I leave, I'm going to make sure everybody knows all their problems. It might be people withdrawing assistance. I could help you, Kenya, but I'm going to choose not to just because I don't like you or because I'm jaded based on an experience I've had. There are certainly silos and turf wars. We could even add politics and those things that come up where people start to argue and battle over what's theirs and their territorial aspect. And they may not realize that your organization is one organization, and you really do need all the pieces to click together. We have being careless about quality, gossiping and backbiting, listening only to what's said and what is not meant. Not what is meant. And I think from an HR functionality, very often people think about HR and they think about the listeners in the organization. People in organizational functions who are charged with understanding problems between people and working to make it better. Or if we're only listening to what's being said and not what is meant, we will really have challenges. So the goal is to know what they're really saying and diving deeper. And then the last one that stands out for me, and this is probably based on some of the work that we do, is the lack of intellectual, and I might even go physical diversity. And that's the idea that we can get ourselves sometimes into groupthink, especially as leadership teams or in executive roles, and that prevents staff from being comfortable in talking to us. And it also might prevent us from really being able to see the best that we can in the organization. So with that said, that's a list, and similar to what I said before, you might have a take on that in many different ways. But my thought is, which of these are you currently dealing with? And then what's the impact on your ability to do your job and or potentially to support your staff and being able to do their job? I'm going to ask you just to think about that. And again, if you've made any notes to those, if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, we can come back to that on the back end. Just to set the stage for the rest of our dialogue, however, what we wanted to do was just kind of have you review something to just define what is it when we talk about dysfunctional behavior. And by the way, we gave you the safe list, if you want to say it as such. There are behaviors, as in, physical interactions where people are battling each other and you have to call security or police officers. There is a blatant, gossip that can be somebody starting issues or challenges for other people, insubordination and things like that. There's a gamut of a list. But regardless, it looks a certain way, and you and I have the responsibility to ourselves, if nothing else, to be able to identify it and to try to figure out how we can work to improve it. So it's on that note that the next part of our discussion is to consider, who does what and how and what you and I can do to make the rest of this webinar beneficial for us. So what I'm going to literally ask you to do right now is to think about your workplace. And I would like for you to think about 2 real relationships that you have. And what I'd like you to consider right now is this. First off, who are the 2 relationships that you have that you say are challenging based on behavioral issues? And again, I stress again, they're challenging based on behavior. And I stress that because some people might irk you the wrong way based on personality, But that doesn't necessarily equate to workplace dysfunction. What we're saying is, there is a behavioral challenge that that person is bringing that is what your role is charged with, kind of handling. And if you can think about relationships that you have, I'm going to have you think about these as we go through the rest of our conversation with the idea that we can give you some tips to work on those too. So as you think about those two relationships, which dysfunctional traits do you notice or might you notice? And then what is the impact of these traits on your business? We ask you, just kind of think broadly when we look at list number 3, page number 3, but the second list of dysfunctional behavior. But consider, who does what? Which employee does what? And why is it important for you to address it? And obviously that will be based on the second bullet point, because there's an impact on your business. So think about that for a second. Who does what? What individual can you identify? What challenges are there? And I might even comically say they're probably the reason you're on this webinar today. But with that said, the conversation for you and I is, well, they're doing what they're doing as far as challenging behaviors. We now have a responsibility to try to address them. And so the thought is, what can we do to address those behaviors? So in this format, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to the next slide, which starts to introduce, well, what are some behaviors that you and I need to look out for? What are some behaviors or potential behaviors that we might be able to connect with and identify with, and then in turn, how might we address some of these? So again, what I will tell you is in the handout that we actually have, I'm going to move us forward to page 4, which is on the screen now, and you'll notice that there are 3 behaviors that are here, and then the little box that's on the right-hand side here, the will and skill grid, the Hershey-Blanchard skill versus will grid. Many people might recognize it from situational leadership. We have this grid here to help you identify what you would need to do for the person that's displaying a specific behavior, and I'll define this a little bit more. And then what I'll start with is just, kind of talking about skill versus will. And on page 5 in the handout, it really kind of highlights this pretty straightforward. When we talk about somebody's skill, that's their experience with the task, training, knowledge, and their natural talents. So can they do the job? You bet they can, because they have solid skills. They've been trained to do that. The flip side of that conversation is the individual's will, their desire to achieve. Are they going to check out on anything you say before you say anything? Or are they the type of employee that's on board outright and they want to do it, but maybe something's missing? Very often that's something being the skill. It also says that they have incentives to do a task, they have security around their job, they're confident in their abilities, etc. So ideally we want employees who have high skill and high will, because they're going to both want to do it and be able to do it. But if I backtrack here in the handout, let's go to the very top and look at behavior 1. And I'm going to slide over to the PowerPoint deck. And as I do that, we're going to talk about these 3 amigos of dysfunctional behavior. And the first one is an acronym that's called FIGJAM. And indirectly, the F is a word that I would never say on air, never say directly to anyone. But the idea is they say that, I'm good, just ask me. And so what does that mean? Well, FIGJAM, or the person that displays FIGJAM, tends to have a mindset that follows what you're going to see momentarily on the slide. The drugstore called you, and they really said they're running out of you. They need you back, if you want to say it as such. This is a person that actually tends to find themselves to have a very, very, very high skill level, but their will is not so high. And the will is not so high because of their mindset, you should clearly understand that they're all that. They're the best employee you have. I use the analogy very often of somebody that's in a sales role. And you can imagine your top salesperson in your organization. Their numbers speak through the roof. So much so that maybe they look like the person that's on the screen right now. Their head is large. They will let everybody know when they walk in the room, I'm in the room, and you know this because of the aura changing with my numbers. But the reality check is they are so good at sales that they don't focus on the other parts of the transaction that is involved with working with your customers, such as the customer service aspect. One great story I tell, or one example that I have, is that I was privileged to do some consulting and training for a very large soda company. That particular company had sales departments, merchandising staff,